Morning, Jonathan.
Right, we're live. Brilliant.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now live. Can I welcome our panel this morning, and welcome any guests who have joined us this morning. This is the Adult Care and Health Cabinet Panel. My name is Richard Roberts. I'm the chairman and the cabinet lead for adult social care and relationship with health in Hertfordshire County Council. I will allow members to introduce themselves after I've done the usual perfunctory introduction that's necessary because of COVID. Due to the virus, the council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the council's website for them to do so. Members of the council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch the microphones off once they've finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish, and I'm quite happy for that. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. If I acknowledge something in the chat, I will use the thumbs up message. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there'll be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain, and I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours and will be taken after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. Disclosure of interests. Members are reminded that if they consider that they have a disclosable pecuniary interest in any matter to be considered at the meeting, they must declare it. And if they consider they have a declarable interest in any matter to be considered at the meeting, they must declare the existence and nature of that interest. I think that's enough on that. Let me just check. Anybody declaring an interest, please do so in the chat. That would be nice. Fiona, were you indicating or not?
Yes, I was, because I have been giving COVID vaccinations professionally, but in Buckinghamshire.
Very disappointed you'll give vaccinating people in Buckinghamshire. Hertfordshire is where the need is. But I can see your halo from here, Fiona, and it is shining bright. Bless you for what you're doing. Thank you. Here. Acknowledgement there from Drida and from Nigel and others, I am sure. Until a moment ago, we had no apologies, but we've now had apologies from Corrine Harstrict, who will not be joining us. And as this is fairly short notice, I'm assuming there is no substitution for her, and everybody else is here. Can I just double check? Is Andrew Stevenson joining us this morning? Has he been invited? He's not in the meeting as we speak.
We're trying to get hold of him, Richard, but he has been invited.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That's great. A quick thank you to Stephanie, to Deborah Jeffrey, to Steve Noxon, who are managing this meeting on our behalf so that it works both internally and externally to the wider world. And we're joined by officers, Chantal Amal, Chris Badger, Alex Ogle, Helen Manurf, probably coming in for the later items. I'm grateful to you all, and there may be others. Your support is appreciated. Guys, I'm going to just now ask you to introduce yourselves, and I shall simply go through the list as I've got it here. Nigel, and then Drida.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nigel Bell, Councillor for West Watford.
Drida Gordon, Councillor for London Colney.
Okay, and Drida, do you lead for a Labour group?
Oh yes, I do indeed, Chair. I'm the lead on adult care.
Thank you. Fiona Guest.
Fiona Guest, I'm councillor for Hempstead North West, and I'm practising community pharmacy.
Thank you. Green's not here. Dave Hewitt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Dave Hewitt, councillor for Cheshunt Central in Broxbourne.
Thank you. Fiona Hill.
Fiona Hill, Deputy Exec Member for Adult Care and Health and Member for Royston East and Ermine.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Tina. Then Jonathan.
Good morning, I'm Tina Howard, councillor for Hemel Hempstead South East.
Thank you, Tina.
And Jonathan Kay, I'm Conservative councillor for Ware South in East Hertfordshire.
We didn't know, as if we didn't yet, if we need to know.
Fair enough, that comment. Nigel, followed by Ron.
Sorry, turning things back on again. Yes, morning. Nigel Quinton, lived-in councillor for Hansard and Pear Tree in the centre of Welwyn Garden City.
Ron Tyndall, Liberal Democrat councillor for Hemel Hempstead St Paul's, leading for Liberal Democrats.
Right, thank you. And William Whitelow, finally.
William Whitelow, councillor for Hemel Hempstead Town and Hertfordshire's representative as governor on the trust of the Royal Free Hospital Group.
Thanks, William. Appreciate it. This is just a couple of points from me. This is our last meeting of this administration. I've only been your chairman for half of that time, for 2 years, but it's both been a pleasure and a privilege. And I can't thank you enough for providing the prod, the scrutiny, the energy that has got us through our agendas and has helped shape some of the policy that has come through to Cabinet, and in the case of the IP, last time going through to full council as well. I appreciate all your energies across all the parties, and as this is the last, I shall wish you all well in the elections to come.
Thank you, Chair. Touche.
Thank you. And we will reflect on COVID through Helen Manerf on item 5. So I'm not going to say anything more about that. I may say something then. Just to say, my heart was gladdened that I opened the Hemel Gazette and half a page was devoted to pictures of families meeting loved ones in care home settings as a result of the easing of restrictions, which was promoted by both the County Council with the care providers and in association with the Hertfordshire Care Providers Association. But it was just heartwarming to see some normality for residents of care homes and their families. There's been a great deal of dialogue, both with Carers in Hearts, Age UK, Alzheimer's Society, and a fine gentleman called John Amos. John, if you're listening, thanks, mate, who held our feet to the fire to try to ensure that visiting was normalised and given the kind of caring humanity that is necessary at these times and after such a period of lockdown. So that was all I wanted to say. The minutes of our meeting of the 3rd of February, I had a look at them. They looked fairly straightforward to me. And I looked, can I just check for accuracy? Does anybody thinks that there is something in there that is not accurate and is incorrect? I'm just going to move on to chat just to check. Please indicate if you think so, and the answer is no. So I'm going to accept those minutes as accurate. Matters arising. That was the IP, the winter plan, domestic abuse update and provider support. 2 of those went on to provider support and IP went on to Cabinet and 1 on to full council. All those issues have been dealt with. Any matters arising, just checking. I have no indications, that's fine. So we will move on to public petitions, of which there are none for this meeting. I can now take us through to item 3, which is Adult Social Care Performance Monitor. This is for quarter 3, 2020-2021. Alex Ogle. Could I ask you? There's Alex. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
That is a fine jumper, if I may say so.
Thank you.
Could I ask you to give us a little presentation and then allow members to ask questions about the performance in Q3? Thank you so much.
No problem. So I think we're going to try and keep it quite brief this time round. So I'll go through quite quickly, and then if there's any questions we can run through. So just to say overall, we're still undergoing the effects of COVID a little bit across some of the kind of activity, and I think we've included an additional activity trend in Appendix 2. Which I won't go through at this stage, but obviously if there are any questions on that. But activity is slowly returning to sort of normal levels. We've continued with some out of hospital pathways, which have been supporting adults for up to 6 weeks, which have had some effects on some of the kind of reporting and placements into, say, residential settings, for example. And since we last spoke, we've had final results from our ASCOF Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework, which were benchmarked against nationally. And I've just put a bit of an overview in here of how we performed. So you can see there that Hertfordshire improved across 17 of our 23 indicators that were collected in 1920. And it feels a bit odd talking about 1920 at this stage in the year, but I think everything was a bit delayed last year. So about 74% improvement across the indicators we reported, did better than our comparative authorities across 16 of the indicators, so about 70% of that. And we've talked before about the Adult Social Care Survey, in which we did 6 out of 7 of our indicators for that we improved on. And generally for the national survey, we did a lot better than comparative authorities or the England average as well. So some good results on the ASCOF for 1920. OK, so we'll just skip into, I hope everybody can see this OK. I can zoom in a little bit more. So the first one we normally look at is paid employment. I've added a little something to this, which I'll go through. So we've maintained performance, so about 6.2% for Q3. We do think this is going to go up a bit before the end of the year. So this is adults with a learning disability in long-term services during the year who are in paid employment. We know that nationally, we're not actually that far from the top. There are a few authorities that are really quite high. But we're about 6.2 is about just within the sort of top quartile in the country. You can see some of the highest in our comparative group was 13.3%, Surrey in 1920. But that's maintained about the same. I would say that by the end of the year, we're probably going to be nearer the 7 mark. We're doing a lot of work at the moment with proactive calls with our work solutions team to try and improve those figures. And what I've added in here, you've got a bit of a breakdown by our services, so you can see our adult disability services in the pie charts here tend to do a bit higher. So 7.5 in Herts Valley, 6.6 in East and North. 0 to 25 service, and we've highlighted before, generally a bit lower because adults in that kind of cohort of age group tend to be in long-term education, for example, at that point, and are less likely to be in employment. So we tend to have a less proportion there. What I've added in here, and it's something that they're thinking about including when they review the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework, is I've included unpaid voluntary work. So on top of the 6.2% for the same cohort of adults, an additional 7.5% of adults in Hertfordshire are in unpaid voluntary work. Holistically, it's a similar kind of outcome from that. It's a positive outcome if they're in unpaid voluntary work. Unfortunately, from the national indicator, it doesn't get included. But I thought it's worth just referencing that point, that there is an additional amount of LD adults who are actually in unpaid voluntary work that has the same kind of positive outcome for those adults as well. OK. And then we'll move to the next slide. So the next one is the 91-day indicator, which has improved quite a lot. So this is adults coming out of hospital over a 3-month period. And straight into what we call enabling style care. So that's short-term services that are put in specifically to enable the adult and improve their independence. And basically it looks to the 91st day to determine whether they're still at home. So that would be not in residential or nursing or back in hospital. And that's improved throughout the year. It is a strange year, obviously, with COVID being a main factor. But 87.7% in Q3. It is going down slightly at the moment, but generally performance on that has improved. quite a lot. And you've got a bit of a breakdown there by male and female adults across age bands. So you can see that the most successful groups are male adults aged 65 to 74 and female adults over 85 that seem to benefit the most or are still at home, which would suggest a successful intervention at that point. Okay. Then we've got safeguarding, sorry. So this is outcomes of safeguarding. So we've got adults who are going through a safeguarding inquiry, who express outcomes that they'd like to achieve as part of that inquiry, and have had those either partially or fully achieved by the end of the inquiry itself. And we're still generally around a regular number there. So sort of 96, 97, 96%, more successful for adult females, which is an interesting number in that more adult females tend to be involved in safeguarding. About 59% of cases are adult female. And then you can look a little bit there across the support groups. Sensory support, very few adults with sensory support going through safeguarding, but those that do have their outcomes achieved significantly. And then adults with support and memory cognition, which is dementia adults, and physical support, personal care adults tend to improve. Those with access and mobility tend to be a bit lower for the safeguarding outcomes. Okay. Then we've got direct payments. Sorry about this. So direct payments. So we had an improvement in Q2. So under COVID, we've seen that numbers of adults receiving long-term care has dropped. So as a cohort of people, those in residential and nursing, which isn't a numerator or a denominator of this, but those in the community receiving adult care have reduced a bit this year. But as a proportion, we saw direct payments go up in Q2. They have dropped a little bit back down in Q3. We think we'll probably end up nearer the 28%, hopefully by the end of the year. But you can also see there that the breakdown across the quarters by our cohorts of services. So you see 0 to 25 service do very well with direct payments, although they've seen a bit of a drop each quarter. And then you've got our adult disability services and then our older people services. And you can see that the older people services, which is a national trend, tend to not have as many people on a direct payment. But this year, they had seen significant increases as a proportion. So you can see our older people in East and North had about 13.7 people, adults on direct payments at the start of the year. And that increased by almost 2%. So about 15%, and a slight drop off for Herts Valleys, but an increase in Q2. But performance is slightly dropping a little bit, but again, we're expecting to be about the 28% by the end of the year. Okay, and then we'll go carers direct payments, which are doing really well. Very slight drop from Q2, but we're expecting again for that to be slightly higher by the end of the year. And really our best performance as a local authority for quite some time, if not ever, for carers direct payments. The adults who aren't on carers direct payments are receiving some sort of other carer service. So that'll be a carer's break or a short break for the adult that they're supporting for themselves, but will be as part of the adults, their supportings package. So although there is that small proportion who aren't on direct payment, we are still supporting them with some sort of service in another way. And again, you can see that breakdown by our individual service areas. Again, 0 to 25 does really well. Herts Valleys, particularly well in comparison for adult disability services compared to East and North. And then you can see that slightly lower numbers, but again, Herts Valleys higher in regards to direct payment uptake for older people services as well. Okay, and then just a quick look at safeguarding, which is the last one we've got. So much lower numbers, well, not significantly lower, but lower numbers than the previous year, 1920 this year. 3 factors have affected that. So just in February, a change in practice around medication errors reduced the amount of concerns coming through the front door, which was a positive thing. We introduced a professional portal for GPs or trusts to report safeguarding, which has improved the triage process. And then obviously we've had COVID take a bit of effect on safeguarding as well. So kind of 3 main factors before the start of the year. But we think that the numbers that we're seeing in Q3 for concerns, which you can see was about 1,904 in the top there, is roughly where we think we're going to settle now, following those changes with the professional portal system that we've introduced, the change in that medication errors. So we're thinking the numbers of concerns and inquiries have kind of settled where they'll be. And we think by the end of the year, at the moment, we're going to get to about 7,539 concerns and 3,539 inquiries. We've taken a slight drop in conversion from concerns to inquiry. And the majority of cases, as they have been previously, are taking place in the adult's own home, followed by residential and nursing settings, followed by hospital settings. And most of those cases, although we've seen a drop following the change in medication error recording, are neglect. 51% were cases of neglect of vaccine omission, followed by physical abuse. And we talk a little bit about domestic abuse because although it's not been a massive increase, as a proportion, domestic abuse has increased a little bit, and it's actually at the moment probably about 2% higher as a proportion of all concerns and inquiries coming through than it has been previously. But that's been monitored particularly during COVID this year. I'll stop there and take any questions. The next kind of slides move into, oh, sorry, I won't stop there. I have 2 more slides, my apologies. We forget about residential and nursing admissions. So 18 to 64 residential nursing admissions, we're projecting 9.3. We think that will be slightly higher at the end of the year per 100,000. You can see we're a bit higher in Q1, Q2, but we're expecting the end of year figure to be a little bit higher than 9.3. We're starting to see the effects of COVID it has had on those numbers at the moment, but we're expecting that to go up a little bit by the end of the year, particularly mental health placements, but we're reviewing that at the moment to ensure that they are actually genuinely new placements into the service. And then for 65 plus, which is 1.8, low numbers, which we reported last time round. So we're currently projecting 245, which is more than half of what we would normally expect by the end of the year. And that is, for a multitude of reasons, obviously affected directly by COVID and somewhat COVID pathways where clients coming out of hospital and they're still on those pathways that might be new clients. And we're probably, as you can see here in the plus 50 sign here, probably expecting more of a number near 356 per 100,000 by the end of the year. And actually looking at numbers at the moment, we have seen significant increases in sort of January, February, March. So we are expecting it to be that nearer that 350, possibly 400 mark by the end of the year, but still significantly lower than we have seen pre-COVID. And the kind of patterns we'll see, which you can see in the COVID activity appendix that's attached, is our home care numbers are going up as our residential numbers go down. So there is possibly that bit of a shift. But as it has been a strange year in regards to activity under COVID, it will be next year when we start to go through a bit of recovery that we see maybe some more regular numbers around it. Apologies, that was quite a quick fly through, but I know we're kind of time bound here. Are there any questions at all?
Alex, that's really helpful. Just to we've got some feedback. Can you mute? Can everybody mute, please? How are we doing? Yeah, that's better. Alex, that's really helpful. Just to whistle stop through there, and I know members have got questions. I've got 4 already, so I'm going to invite Fiona Guest. If you could ask your question or comment, followed by Ron, Dreda, then Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, the indicators that have been presented to us, it states on the report that there's been a selection of indicators presented to us. I'd like to ask how the indicators that have come before this committee today have been selected. And I didn't see any comparison of the hospital trusts served by Hertfordshire in relation to detox. So is that information not available?
So just on the detox question, it's no longer a national indicator. When COVID came in, and Chris might wish to jump in on this as well, but as COVID came in and the pathways changed, they moved completely away from reporting of detox. So we don't currently report it. It's still monitored in hospitals, and delays are obviously still monitored in hospitals, but it's no longer, and currently for the foreseeable future, as we're aware, is no longer going to be a kind of national indicator that we're measuring, although they're looking to replace it shortly. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add to that.
There's almost a maturity because of the need. because of the need to really focus on the discharge from hospital, the working arrangements have been so much closer and so much more mature that it almost negates the need for the detox figures. But they were very low before we went into COVID. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, what's going to happen is that a new way of measuring flow and discharges from hospital is being agreed as we speak. That will include all the reasons why someone may not have gone home when they're ready to, whether it be support services, assessments they need in the hospital, tests they need doing in the hospital to understand that. That's being agreed. When that is agreed, there will be a comparable measure where we will be able to compare that trust by trust, as you indicated, Fiona. So that will arrive. We think that'll be coming online probably October, November. We'll see what that looks like. It's probably something we will report in Alex's quarterly performance reports in the future. But what we'll need to do is understand how that's being measured and when we get to see the data. But we'll have that, and I think you'll be able to see that. Well, probably not next quarter, but the quarter after.
Thank you.
I think that's right, Chris. I think it's with potential transfers of responsibilities around discharge from hospital, how that's managed in what care settings and hospital and therapeutic settings. That is a really big piece of work, and that will come to panel. I think you're right, Chris. Thank you. And the first part of Fiona, your question, why do we look at the indicators we do? There we are.
It's a bit of a mix, to be honest. We try to kind of highlight some of the key areas around outcome-based reporting. We're semi-stuck, we're not stuck, but obviously if we want to benchmark and be able to kind of pull some indicators together, we tend to utilize those that we can compare ourselves against. So we've got the employment indicator, which is about that kind of learning disability outcomes-based positive piece that we try and pull in there. Obviously, we've got quite a few, and I know Appendix 1 kind of gives you the data table, the table showing some of the wider 3-year plan measures that we have. But we try and focus on some of the key outcomes ones that we do. And then at the start of the year, we look at different ways to do it without overwhelming the performance report with kind of detail on each and every one. But it's definitely something you can take away. And I know we're going into a new sort of a recovery year next year and a 3-year plan, which will change some of these indicators, a lot of which will be co-produced as part of the co-production board. So they'll see a different flavour of that, and we'll try and mix up some of the kind of indicators and points that we bring across. We do try, without necessarily the commentary on everyone, give a flavour of trends and analysis in Appendix 1 there, in the kind of more detailed view of some of the other indicators we have. I hope that answers some of that question.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Fiona. Ron.
Thank you, Chair. Alex, a couple of questions. First of all, on page 13 of 15, would you agree that the downward trend of admissions at the moment is partly affected by a reluctance to go into care homes? We've got this COVID effect that possibly we'll see that bounce back once we regain some form of normality. Definitely.
It will be a factor, definitely.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, fine. My major question is concerning the employment of disabilities, especially the 0 to 25 service on page 6 of 15. You've mentioned it about education, and because I was staggered by the low take-up rate of 2.4%. And you, as I say, you mentioned education. First, can I suggest that you add an extra indicator on that line? Otherwise, it gives the wrong message, as it were, because it looks very badly. And it's also linked to the Haffles report in item 4, which I shall come back to when we get to there, where there are only 13 of 543 young people in employment. So I just wonder if there's any further comment. I do think we need to take out education from that indicator so we can actually see what is the effect, because employment, particularly in the 18 to 25 range, is, I think, crucial for establishing someone on the road to life.
Yeah, and I agree, and we can bring the detail from a reporting perspective. System-wise, we've been set up to kind of report against some of these indicators in a way. Education isn't an option to immediately drag that number out, but we can add that as part of the detailed commentary, which I think we've had before from our 0 to 25 service lead, just to explain a kind of rough idea about, or go into more detail around the full-time education part. That seems to be playing the major role in, because they are in full-time education majority of the week, there isn't much time left to get them into employment, but we can add something more kind of more detail around it, definitely, for next time to at least add explanation in.
Yeah, I must admit, and I can't remember the acronym, I'm more worried about those that may not be in education or employment. And I think they're the cohort, and it could be a large one, where I think possibly we need to spend more attention on. And if we haven't got the indicator for education, and we just think it's employment ready, I just think we need to have the right indicators to steer our thinking.
And definitely, just as a separate note, there is a wider review of this particular indicator, and we've talked about it before here, is that, you know, it is very much focused on the LD cohort supported with long-term services in the year, whereas very much that it's a wider group we probably want to look at. Like we say, there's no reason why we shouldn't include unpaid voluntary work, for example. And maybe we could do a bit of a breakdown on that 0 to 25 service of what a proportion of them are in unpaid voluntary work and get a bit more of a flavour for it. But definitely, yeah, we can look at that and widen the scope a little bit, just to give a bit more explanation as to why on that.
Just to come back, Ron, I think when we discussed this last time, probably the last time we had the performance report, we did say that we want to give this, and that was backed by the director as well, we want to give this a pretty much a complete overhaul, in a sense, as to, because it does link into how those with learning disability link back into community, link into volunteering opportunities, education, as you quite rightly point out, and paid work. And we have to work for our cohort. We're talking a significant cohort here, some 4,000 of our residents are supported by us directly. So I do think this is an area we need to. It's not just about improving; it's about giving that opportunity. And I think, as you said, improving life chances, improving confidence, ability to contribute, volunteer. It all needs to be there. There's a great deal going on already. I think it ties very much in with the emphasis on the links to the voluntary sector, but also, and again, Ron, you're right, linking through to HAFLs and both job sustainability and the opportunity to work. So thank you for that. That's good.
Thank you, Chair. And if we could add, I think the phrase that I would like to add is quality of life, because it's okay if we care for those individuals that are under our care. But if we don't also try and enhance their quality of life, then I think we are failing them.
I think, can we just take that as read? I don't think we're trying not to improve the quality of life. So I will take that as read then, Ron. Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ron. Drida.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It'll be no surprise to members that my question also is in regards to people with learning disabilities and their employment opportunities. And I'm very pleased to see that these figures are separated, i.e. paid employment and voluntary. I would be against actually those merging, because it would be more difficult to tease out the reality of the situation. And it's interesting, isn't it, that we have 7.5% of people in voluntary unpaid work, which is a higher percentage, of course, than those in paid employment. Now, that may be for some reason some voluntary work will suit some people, and that will be their choice. But anecdotally, you will know, Chair, that I taught children with learning disabilities, and in informal talks that I've had with some of them as they've grown older, work opportunities have been very limited, and some of them have done voluntary work, not out of choice. But I just wonder, what sort of monitoring do we do around this voluntary work to ensure that young people, or older people indeed, are not exploited, and that the voluntary work they're doing isn't something that actually could result in paid employment?
You've covered quite a range of topics there, Drida. The exploitation of those with learning disability, picked up recently by the Safeguarding Board in thinking about cuckooing, whereby somebody may come in to exploit a young person in their accommodation. A serious issue, but being looked at both with ourselves.
Sorry, my point on exploitation really was in terms of working in a voluntary capacity.
Okay, thank you. I think it goes to the heart of what we do, to be honest. We have community opportunities and we have day services, which is all about broadening the opportunity for those with learning disabilities to do what they want to do and to engage in a broad curriculum of activity. I can see that Chris wants to come in. Chris, can I ask you to come in?
Yeah, Alex, can you take the slides down? Is that
yeah,
okay?
sorry, I haven't seen that.
No, don't worry. Yeah, Drida, it's a good point here. I mean, it's voluntary opportunities for people with learning disability or without learning disability can be really valuable, and also, you know, can also be a stepping stone to employment as well, which is obviously to be welcomed. Where we know about the voluntary opportunity, either through, you know, whether it be the allocated social worker, or we've supported them through Work Solutions or through other agencies, then obviously we'd be keeping a close eye on the extent to which that was a healthy opportunity and not exploitative. We may not know. There's lots of people in the county with a learning disability that we don't work with very intensively because they're living pretty independently. It would be hard for us to know. Clearly, that's where I'd hope that safeguarding arrangements, etc., would kick in, and people have got an ability to see that. I like you. I think there's a real room for voluntary opportunities. But I remember speaking to a young man at an award ceremony that was doing a day's voluntary work at the garden centre, and his parents expressed some frustration that they thought it was a valuable opportunity, but for that individual sort of self-worth and self-satisfaction, it was not nearly as good as a job where he was getting paid for it, because it would have been felt more sort of authentic and genuine, and also having that money would then have led to a number of choices that he would have been able to make about how he was going to spend his money, that kind of independence and so forth. You know, those of us in council jobs, we get paid for what we do, and then we make choices about what we spend our money on and how we live as a result, and that's the kind of contract with work, right? And so we're wherever possible, we're trying to get people into those paid roles. So I think it's a good point. I think in the strategy that we're going to be developing, I think we'll have to have a place for voluntary opportunities, but position that as a stepping stone wherever possible. But I think you're right, include the arrangements we need to make sure that those arrangements were purposeful for volunteering and not exploitative. I think it's a fair challenge, and it's one that Rich and I have discussed about, you know, what the optimum balance is and so forth. So we'll take that forward in the employment strategy. And actually, your experience, Drida, could be really useful actually in helping us develop that strategy. So it may be something that you may want to help us with actually. That's okay.
Just a couple of examples across the county, one in the west, one in the east. So Sunnyside Rural Trust increasingly offering both paid and volunteering opportunities to work with parish councils, for example, as village wardens, supervised. Really, I can tell, really enthusiastic involvement, not exploitation, about getting out and about, meeting people in the community, really good. And Mudlarks as well in Hertford, working community cafe, just the kind of supervisory, unexploited but opportunity, chance to be ambitious and in a safe environment. I think. Without going on about this too much, I think we're on the same page here. So we're grateful for your question and comment. Thank you. Is that you answered, Drida? Lovely, thank you. Nigel Quinton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going to 1.5, proportion of carers who receive direct payments. I noticed there's quite a big variation between the two sides of the county. Just wondered if there are any comments on that. And then on, sorry, just trying to find the next one. The safeguarding concerns, no, sorry, beg your pardon, wrong page. 1.7, the numbers of mental health patients being admitted to residential nursing care. Obviously, that's the bulk of the cohort that are being admitted. Is that a rise in that sector compared to previous years? And finally, I think there are a couple of things on the table at the end in Appendix 1, which are red, and I just wondered if we could have a couple of comments on those. One of them is the proportion of regulated social care organisations rated good or above, which has dropped, I believe. May well be COVID related, I don't know. And then there's a weird one, which I really don't understand, 5.9, Better Care Trust Fund, where we don't have any comparative data, but the numbers are red, and I've not seen that before to my knowledge.
Okay. I don't know, Chris, if you want to come back on the DP one first.
Yeah, on the DP, the direct payments issue, Nigel. So it's mainly the differential is in older people's, isn't it, geographically between east and west, I think. I think if we go up to it, yeah, well, traditionally direct payments have been lower in certainly in older people's services in east and north versus west. A couple of reasons. One is just simply practice, that different teams practice in different ways, and they've been hotter on it in the west of the county. But also historically, it's less of an issue now, but historically there's been a greater shortage of home care in the west of the county, various factors around economy, provider setup, etc., demand. And more people have chosen to have the direct payment as an ability to widen the net of people they can access home care from, and that's why we've got more direct payments there, because the market's been tighter and people have actually sought different ways of accessing home care. So in a sense, it's good that you've got a high level of direct payments, but if we're honest, that has masked a structural issue in the home care market, which is why that's been delivered that in all honesty. So that's why that's been higher in that area. You'll have seen east and north catching up, which is really great. Part of that, I think, relates as well to in COVID, less residential care admissions for obvious reasons and people being reluctant to go into residential care. Less people have a direct payment in residential care because it's not so much a model of care where you need more day-to-day control, because in a sense you're either in residential care or you're not. But where people then aren't going to residential care, taking a direct payment for more sort of flexible, innovative support like living care, home care packages becomes more relevant to you. So that probably explains why the east and north figures have gone up a little bit as well during COVID. But that's something we look to sustain. That was the first one. I've forgotten the other ones.
Mental health patients in nursing care. That was.
So for 1864, it is a bit of an increase, but this, like I said, when we were kind of going through the slides, it's under review at the moment with HPFT just to make sure that they are genuine placements. When I say that from a reporting perspective, when we look at new adults, it is meant to be that they are brand new placements going into residential or nursing. They haven't had a sort of extended gap where they've been in hospital, say, or wherever that is. So what I would say is, I'm not saying take it with a pinch of salt at the moment, but we're reviewing it with HPFT to ensure that that's a genuine figure, because it is higher than they have put in before in previous years. I can't say too much more on it at the moment. I'm hoping that we're just about obviously to do our end of year figures at the end of this quarter. And it will all be reviewed by that point, as they've been looking into it over the last month or so to make sure that they are genuine.
Right to raise it, Nigel. Chris, did you want to come back on that?
And then also of the working age group, which this measures, isn't it? This is the 18 to 64. Mental health issues are likely to be a high number of admissions relating to mental health issues as a percentage than physical disability. Just there's a greater prevalence around that, so that number is higher. Your point about increasing or decreasing still stands, Nigel, but you would expect that share to be quite high.
And then we had a couple of red indicators. Did you pick up on one of those? Is the Better Care Fund?
Yeah. So
any comments on those?
So the Better Care Fund is it's one that's not sort of directly in our control. It's one that's a system one. It's around
emergency admissions.
Yeah, emergency admissions, and the target. Just remind me on the target, Alex.
Target. It's a bit of it's an odd one. This one, I say this. So as part of the Better Care Fund monies that we're given as part of integrated working, we have 4 key measures that form the Better Care Fund indicators. One of which is the 91-day indicator, which we have here. Another is the 65+ admissions, which we show in this pack. It used to be delayed transfers of care in there as well. And then we also have this one, which is the total emergency admissions. It is part of our health and well-being boards.
I was just good, yeah.
But it's meant to be a quarterly rate of 3,323 per population, per 100,000 population per quarter.
Shouldn't it be green?
So it should be green. And
it should be green. Yes, I just noticed that.
I should say it should be green. So we will tweet that. That is my fault.
It was a deliberate error to ensure Councillor Quinton's sharp scientific brain was.
I was just going to say, particularly for you, Nigel, because I know you spot them. But yes,
scientific background helps in these situations. Thank you, Nigel.
Was an artistic matter, and therefore the fact that we have a head of the service who should be more artistic bent actually should have recognised the differential in colours.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chairman's in danger of losing this meeting completely. So if we could just pick up on the care homes rated good, effectively good or outstanding, which was the
scoring.
So COVID impact here.
Yeah. So I mean, we set a target of 80%. It's a bit of, there haven't been as many inspections obviously done this year. The CQC have done a handful and restarted them recently. I think locally we've, Chris, you could correct me on this. I think locally we've just restarted looking at some of the kind of inspections because they were put on hold given all the other COVID work that was going on. So they are a little bit lower as they catch up. And obviously from the CQC perspective, it is based on whatever the last inspection was. So there will be some that will be last year's inspection rates as well as this year.
So I think
that's Chris.
So there's an issue around this year. It's going to be a funny year, and the ones they've inspected may well be skewed to ones that are higher risk because they've had to go in. That being said, we've got the next time we come to panel, we'll have the Hert's care standard report, which talks about care provider quality. It's still the case that where our quality, our overall quality levels as measured by CQC and our internal ratings are higher for home care. They're amongst the best in the country. We still had issues with residential and nursing care where there's areas where we'd want that to be higher. So it's an area of focus and improvement. One of the things that we've done, so councillors are clear that we see it as a priority, is given that we've not been able to be as in out and about with boots on the ground in care homes as we'd have liked for last year for obvious reasons, as those restrictions ease, we've recruited more monitoring officers, so officers that go in and manage and look at quality. We've recruited more of those ready to really put the foot to the floor on inspections and monitoring visits as we come out of lockdown, because we want to make sure that standards have remained as high as possible. So it's an area for improvement. Nigel, yeah, you're absolutely right to raise it.
Thank you. Cool. And Chair, if I may, I'm sorry, at the beginning I was a bit distracted because I had my jab yesterday and I've got a slight headache this morning. That's the only ill effect, thankfully. But I missed on the minutes. There was an action from you to write to the government about funding issues. Just wanted to check that had been done.
That was on domestic abuse, Chair.
I did. Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. And where were we? My apologies, I can't remember the setting, but it was the Health and Wellbeing Board, wasn't it? Health and Wellbeing Board looking at domestic abuse as well. The concern, Nigel, that I have, that I suspect you have, and I suspect all on this panel have, is there is this short-term thinking around funding, and it is unhelpful with a long-term, persistent, chronic problem. And we have, as an authority, I believe, We've got to show some mettle, some leadership around this, and making a bit of noise around it, and we are doing. But I think you're absolutely right to pick that up. Thank you. That was at the Health and Wellbeing Board that got discussed in some detail, and of course we had it as well at panel last time. Thank you.
Chair, on that business of funding, I understand ADAS, the Association of Directors, have actually made a plea to government on this subject, and perhaps the Director of Adult Care could share their comments with us after the meeting.
Happy to dig those out.
There's a BBC article. I was going to mention the same, Ron. Social care leaders warn of funding cliff edge. And I have to say, Richard, I mean, I do think that we've done an especially good job here in Hertfordshire. Hats off to you and Chris in terms of making sure that our care providers are supported. It hasn't happened everywhere in the country. So we do really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Appreciate that. I've got William, then Jonathan. Thank you. And then I think that concludes our question and comment section.
Looks like I've jumped the queue as I saw it. Oh, well, thank you. It's a very simple question.
Chairman's prerogative.
Any long answer at all. Looking towards the future and the risks that we face, I just wanted to know whether or not there was any trend on recruitment and retention of our staff, whether we're having any difficulties, etc.
Yeah, I can answer that. So it's twofold, this, William. It's a really good question. So the first one is the wider care sector. So that's that's a bigger pool. That's a sort of broadly 25,000 people in the care sector. That's more sort of impacted by the overall economic situation, and it's a different workforce segment. At the minute, it's difficult to tell because a lot of economic activity is kind of frozen at the minute because of furlough and stuff like that, for want of a better term. At the minute, providers are relatively confident about recruitment pipelines. They feel like it's okay at the minute. So a couple of things there. That's partly because at the wage levels they're paying is probably the areas of the economy that are going to be impacted most, for example, retail, etc., by the economic position at the minute. Clearly, yesterday we announced to the wider market the likely inflation uplift for the year, which includes the commitment to try and drive up wages for the lowest paid within that group as well, which we think will help attract workforce in. So at the minute that feels okay, but we'll have to wait and see and monitor that over the coming months. So that's one thing. Second thing is internally, it feels okay at the minute in terms of, say, social work recruitment, occupational therapy recruitment. It feels okay. It is challenging though, because with some of the restrictions around working in the office, it's quite hard to start a new role in a new organisation without being in personally. That's quite difficult. That being said, we are still able to recruit, but we have also use some of the government's money. There was a workforce grant that came through, which had to be spent by the end of this financial year. What we've done is we've front loaded some of that spend to really invest in high quality recruitment materials and so forth, to really get a really sharp recruitment campaign out, both for wider workforce and internal, William. So we'll look at doing some bespoke work on recruitment. We won't just do the usual adverts. We're going to go out proactively to do that. So again, I think we'll know more in Q1 next year as things settle down a bit. The issue we've got is where we recruit, for example, monitoring officers or social workers to deal with backlogs. The problem we've got is every other local authority is facing exactly the same challenge, and we're all fishing in the same pool. So, what we're also doing is continuing to invest in things like apprenticeships to grow our own, for want of a better term.
That's really helpful answer, Chris. Thank you, William. All right. Cool. And can I bring in Jonathan then? Thank you. Thanks, William.
In terms of domestic abuse, I see there's a slight increase, but we've heard a lot during lockdown this past year about a huge increase in some parts of the country on domestic abuse. How confident are you that the figures that you have for Hertfordshire are accurate? I know you can only deal with the figures that you actually get supplied, but are you confident that they do represent what's actually going on, as it were?
Chris?
You're on mute, Chris. I'd say that the figures, in a sense, accurate in that they absolutely portray what the system and whether it be police or ourselves have received. Do we think it's an underestimation of what's probably going on? Sadly, yes. I think it will be. We must assume that the pressures that lockdown will have brought is likely to have increased instances of domestic abuse. Again, we would expect as lockdown eases, as with so many of the performance figures actually, for those trends to change. I think the question will be the extent to which that has gone up. I mean, clearly in the budget, we looked at increasing in the integrated plan budget, our own budget looked at increasing capacity in domestic abuse. I know we're looking at whether we can even get some more investment into that area to deal with what we think may be an increase over the next year, Jonathan. So we're working up some proposals now with some looking at applying for certain other bits of money we may have in the council to do that next year as part of COVID recovery, because I suspect it will go up, Jonathan. What I can't say is how much, what that will look like, but I think we're planning on the assumption that it will. Brilliant if it doesn't, great, but we're planning on the assumption with partners that it will go up, and looking to resource up collectively. Clearly we've also got the new domestic abuse legislation, which brings its own extra responsibility. So either way, I think we're going to need more support in that area, and we're working really hard to do that.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. I see Ron wanted to come in, but just before Ron does, I think, Jonathan, having heard from children's services as well, and although children back at school, it's probably going to take 1 or 2 or even 3 quarters before the full impact of COVID is understood. I think the same is true for domestic abuse, and I suspect that we'll end up with perhaps the impact of coercion, the impact on mental health. So some of the outcome from where domestic abuse has been a problem and it's been contained within the home, it may take a little while to come out, but you can imagine both community and, if you almost higher interventions may well be something that we'll be looking at later in the year, which is why what Chris has just said about we need to keep our eye on some of these things coming out post-COVID, and I, for one, will be happy to support improved interventions as necessary. I think I said something very similar around the vol sector funding. If we need a little bit more, we will find a little bit more. The figures at the moment suggest underreporting of some of our nastier issues that we have to deal with, and let's just keep an eye on it in the next 6 months or so. That's really helpful question. It sort of ties in with the sentiment of a number of questions this morning. Ron, briefly, Alex, did you want to come in?
Just really quickly, just to add to that, just to note that the figures that we report on the performance report are based on adults that are presenting at adult social care, and those that move to inquiry are those that generally need to be eligible for social care. So it'll be a bit of a subset of the wider domestic abuse cases. So I think you might find that the difference is probably slightly higher when you look at the wider police figures, for example.
Okay, thanks, Alex. That's helpful. Ron, but briefly, thanks.
First of all, I would suggest that we look at the statistics. We note the upward trend, but they are, I would suggest, unreliable because of the COVID and lockdown and everything else. And so I would suggest that the instances are probably much higher, especially where you've got perpetrator and victim in close circumstances over a period of time because of the not being allowed out that much. And so it has exacerbated. But what I just wanted to say is money has now been received from government to add to the funding. So from April, the county domestic abuse unit and the board are on the case. The county's got over 2 million at its disposal. They're looking at a whole range of services. They're retailoring the services, so there'll be a sort of reports coming out. Also, each of the districts have been allocated between £33,000 to £36,000 to contribute their share of the services. So it's all highly integrated. I had a domestic abuse meeting yesterday, so this is why I'm up to date. So it really is. If anybody wants details, if they contact their local CS community services programme or contact the Helen Gladhill or Sarah Taylor at County, they can give you up to dates, but it's at least something is happening.
Very helpful.
Absolutely.
Very helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, the quantum of funding is where it's at. It's sometimes it's the timescales that are less helpful. And just to say, I think, Alex, that one of the sentiments of this morning is that some of the post-COVID indicators, particularly around mental health, domestic abuse, where there might be behavioural changes, those are the sort of things that we'll probably want to pick up on in more detail in the next quarter, so a little bit more detail on domestic abuse would be really helpful, even if it broadens it across perhaps what the police are finding, perhaps what children's services are finding, perhaps what the broader indicators are, picking up Jonathan's point, and we can bring that in as on a quarterly basis, really, so that we're just keeping our finger on that particular pulse. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Jonathan, for your question. That's great. I have no more indicators to speak, and just can I just say to the service, thank you so much for your efforts in the last year or so. The fact that we have improved against national indicators to the tune of 3/4 or 74% is really impressive, and in our comparator group by 70%, that is just where we'd want to be. And most importantly, in 2019, we became aware that some of our care indicators were suggesting that our carers were less enamoured with the services they were receiving. So the work of the last year or so, or really the last 2 years, to bring the 6 out of the 7 indicators around the adult social care survey, which was brought to us on the last meeting, in fact. But that again is a really good sign of engagement, and often through our vol sector partners like Carers in Hearts. So I'm really grateful for that today. I'm grateful for your comments and questions, and I think we've probably picked up most of that will be incorporated into future reporting back. Alex, thank you again for presenting for us. Really appreciate it, and thank you and the team for making sure that we get the data that we want. And increasingly, you're being responsive to the need of the panel, not just ASCOF, for example. Appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, right. What we probably need to do is note the report in the usual way, agree, disagree, or abstain. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Andrew's in. Welcome, Andrew Stevenson. I didn't realise you were there. That's good. Thank you. That's gone through. Let's take that as read. That's great. 1 or 2 still coming through. That's noted. Thank you very much. Please, can I now introduce for our next item Chantal Lamel, who heads up our HAFL service, Adult Community Learning, and really, this is a kind of annual overview, but also a how are we doing at the moment? And of course, there's the element of COVID in there as well. So Chantal, thank you so much, and please introduce your report.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. Normally, I would come and talk to you about the results of the academic year and how well we have been doing in terms of our education and supported employment provision. And normally we would have done that around October, November time, but we didn't have the opportunity to do that last autumn. So we decided that it would be useful for this panel to hear how COVID has affected our intervention and our service generally. So what I've done, I'm not going to repeat whatever is in the report. I'm hoping there will be a lot of questions about it. but I thought that it would be useful just to summarize or highlight a few points. My first slides that I just wanted to summarize very quickly, or to remind panel members, is that our service is roughly, we've got a turnover about £6 million now, and roughly half of that is about adult skills and adult education. The other half is very much about supported employment. So over the past years, our remit has changed, where in the past we used to be only adult education. We are very much so now half and half in terms of our allocation and our funding, various funding sources. And even within that breakdown, it's to remind panel members that about 40% of that is in-house delivery, and then 60% of it is delivered through a procurement process and delivered through a number of partners in the voluntary sectors, the colleges, and other independent providers as well. So it's quite a variety. In terms of trying to summarize the impact on our education provision, I think it's fair to say that we've had a huge need for transforming what we do because of COVID. Not only have our learners' profiles have been changing and evolving over the past few months, we've seen various trends appearing in the first 3 months, or from March to June, and then it started changing again in September, and it's still evolving. So our learner profiles are changing, and it hasn't settled yet. So even talking to other local authorities with similar services, they are seeing similar changes within the profiles that are going of learners that are coming through their doors. As a result of COVID, we very much have had to look at our curriculum. So what used to be in demand a year, 2 years ago is not necessarily in demand today, but also we're very aware that what will be needed in the future will be very different too. Again, as a direct response to COVID, but also in the change in the economic context as well as social context. And because of COVID, again, our delivery model has changed, where in the past we used to do pretty much everything face-to-face. We've moved very quickly to everything online. That in itself has come with huge challenges, but we have met those challenges quite well. We are now in a situation where we can't wait to be able to go back to face-to-face delivery, because we think that the type of learners that we're trying to reach respond much better generally, face-to-face. But we also understand that some learners are engaging better online, and therefore we're looking at already now converting our provision to be a mixed delivery. So there will be some online, some face-to-face, and some a mixture of the two. But what has become very clear is that we've been under tremendous pressure to be able to deliver the same amount of provision with no additional funding. And even when we were not, even when we were allowed to be in the classroom, in September, October, because of the social distancing measures, we could not very often have 12, 15 people in the classrooms, because we had to have 2 meters distancing and so on. So we often were running courses in much smaller cohorts because of that, but we still are supposed to deliver to the same number of learners. So we had to do more cohorts to be able to deliver, to reach the expected targets. So that's a summary in terms of the impact on the education provision. The other half of our service is split into 2 parts. The first part is the Build a Better Opportunities project, which, as you know, is funded by, in part by the National Lottery and in part by the European Social Fund. And then the other part, which is new in a way to us, is that the Work Solutions team, which has been established for more than 20 years in Hertfordshire County Council, joined our service on the 1st of April, and again provides supported employment provision. So there has been, because of COVID, there has been a dip in referrals for a number of reasons, and different reasons for the BBO project than it has been for Work Solutions. But we are now seeing an increase again of referrals. So the referral process is picking up through all the various routes that we have already established, and new routes that we're setting up. based on the conversation that we just had before about the report that Alex made, I think it's important to identify here that the clients coming through the work solutions route, if you want, are clients that are adult care clients or 0-25 teams clients, and therefore they have care packages. So these are people with learning difficulties that have got care packages that are referred to us. Whereas the BBO opportunities, 60% of the clients coming through the Building Better Opportunities project have got learning difficulties, but do not have a care package. So the subset that Alex was talking about is quite a small subset. When we are reporting that people with learning difficulties or disabilities are into employment, there are many more people that are into employment or are indeed in need of support that are not coming through the adult care services. In terms of where we are now and the challenges we're facing, we know that there are rising numbers of unemployment, rising numbers of low to moderate mental health issues, and therefore rising numbers of people with barriers to learning and employment. We also know that there is an increased need to support people into growth sectors, because some of the sectors have, Chris has mentioned before, we know that some sectors have particularly been affected with a lot of people being furloughed, a lot of people being unemployed already. And so what we are looking at is how we can support people with barriers to learning and employment into more sustained employment in growing sectors or growth or strong sectors, or those that are more likely to recover, over the next few months or few years. But we also know that there are a lot of people that are currently employed, that are in low-paid, low-skilled employment, that are at high risk of being unemployed in the future due to automation, and we see that as part of our remit as well, because those people generally are less resilient to changes in a difficult labour market. And of course, that was not mentioned before, but there is a growing digital divide, and the people that typically would have access learning through communities or support through communities do not necessarily have the technology, do not necessarily know how to use the technology to be able to engage with learning or even to engage with people supported employment. So that is a huge issue for us. And often Hertfordshire, unfortunately, is not seen as a priority or top priority for funding. Now, I think I'm going to stop there, although just to let you know when I'm going to send the slides that I've added a few things in terms of what we see our strategy and what we need to do. And for those of you who are more interested in figures, I've also added at the end a breakdown of our funding through all of the different funding sources that we have for the service. The funding changes year on year, by the way, so which is why we say it's roughly 6 million at the moment, because it very depends on how much funding we can bid for, how much funding I can raise for the different parts of it. But the main strategy for our service now is very much to look at a cohesive approach to education and supported employment. You can't split the two. You know, people that are in need of support to get into work very often need upskilling first. So we see that as very much something that needs to go hand in hand, and we are adapting our strategy according to it. I'll stop here. I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts. I see a lot of hands that are raised.
Chantal, that's fantastic. Really appreciate your presentation and the great breadth that the HAFL's work undertakes, and of course now linked with work solutions. So the first question I'd like is Nigel Bell, coming to you first, and then I shall pick up on the others as indicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Chantal. Yeah, I've got great concern here. I know it was slightly mentioned in the last, well, people did mention in the last agenda item, the long-term effects that obviously COVID and the shutdown is going to have on a lot of our most vulnerable residents, especially those with learning difficulties. And I just, if I can refer to parts of your report, page 29, 413, you say learner figures, obviously I'm concerned about the drops in engagement, as you said, and the potential problems this is going to cause in the future. Obviously the fact that, you know, even using Zoom and even WhatsApp has not necessarily been suitable for a lot of this cohort that we're talking about. Page 30, 414, clearly it's a worry and a concern I've got and our others have, that there's a decrease in English for speakers of other languages, the ESOL, from 25.4 down to 16.9. Again, page 36, 432, you're referring to the BBO projects. You said there's a new recruitment drive referred over the next few weeks. And then finally, if you connected to that, page 39, you said you should know by the end of March if there's going to be that extra funding confirmed, and if the time is going to be extended to December 2023, which obviously is be a lot, 18 months on, which would be good. So I just wondered if you'd heard anything about that. But just the general thing, the page 29, and obviously the worry and the concern about the decrease in English for an ESOL, and obviously I'm concerned about the, how BAME figures and how they're going to be affected. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the ESOL figures, this is a trend that we've seen, that has been seen nationally. One of what we have noticed is people that are already at level 1, engaging at level 1, are able generally to engage through online learning. The people with very low level of skills, of English skills, and that's not only ESOL, actually, it's also low level of literacy for English speakers. We have noticed nationally that people with low level of English tend to not engage as well online. So what we've started to do, particularly since October and then again in January, we put in quite a lot of support pre-course. So when people express an interest, we support them before the course. We show them how to engage online. We take them through, not in the lessons, outside of the lesson with somebody that one-to-one support to try to get them to engage, to encourage them to do it. That has helped already a little bit, but not as much. So we haven't, not as much as we would like to. So we know that this is the type of provision that really has to happen face to face. So as I said before, we can't wait to go back into the classroom, really. So it's similar situation with people with LDD, people that have got low level of cognitive skills or that have got difficulties with using tech. The fact that we're trying to get them to engage online is an additional barrier. And some of them may need help from somebody else in the house to be able to engage online. And if they don't have that help in the house, they just can't do it, despite the fact that we try from our end. But of course, there are also quite a lot of people with low level of skills who just don't have the technology. And that is the first barrier. How do we make sure that people who have got low income or very little income, how do we make sure that they've got the right technology and enough broadband to be able to engage? I mean, we had situations where people engage online for 2 or 3 lessons, then they had used up all their data allowance, and they were not able to pay for extra on their phone. To be some of them were literally trying to engage via their phone. So there are some fundamental barriers that are in a way like outside of our remit, but we are recognizing that, we're raising that with the Department of Education, with the Department of Work and Pensions, and trying to see whether there are any additional source of funding that we can apply for.
Okay, on the BBO and the figures, sorry, and whether you'll get the funding and the figures till 2023 December, can you say anything on that?
Well, we're not allowed to say it right now.
Be brave and diplomatic at the same time.
You're
Chantal.
confident. Are you confident we'll get it? You can.
I think Chantal's going to say she's quietly confident.
Quietly confident.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely confident.
I
Could
accept.
I be, if Chantal's quietly confident, could I be loudly confident?
Okay,
Yes.
I accept that then.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I'll leave it there, Richard. But I just had to voice my concerns. I'm sure we all have, especially about the very vulnerable group. Thanks.
Thank you for expressing them, Nigel. Appreciate it. I've got Dave Hewitt next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Most of my questions are around 4.13 and the widely varying percentages of people taking up learning opportunities. For instance, people between 25 and 44 up from about just over 4% to 44%, and the same sort of percentage in the BAME community. Two questions around this. It doesn't give me a feeling for the actual numbers, how many people are involved. I've read through the report, maybe I've missed that. And the other thing that's not reported is, do we know how many men, how many women, what percentage there are of those? And finally, do any of the courses, are any of the courses specifically useful for those wishing to enter the caring industry? And is it possible to actively promote that? Thank you.
Thank you. That's my apologies, first of all, for not mentioning how many learners we have. That's an oversight from my part. We roughly work with 5,000 learners a year. That has not really declined. So we had maybe a little bit less last year by the end of last academic year, but on the whole, we tend to retain roughly 5,000 learners a year. So the numbers that's, if you look at, for example, the breakdown male learners, I would apply to about 5,000 learners a year, roughly. In terms of the courses, we have introduced new courses, and because of the learners that we work with, we tend to introduce them to different careers. So we've got an introduction to working in schools. We've got an introduction to entering social care, for example, where we would not necessarily at the moment offer the level 1, level 2, level 3 qualification to social care. I'm not saying we won't do that in the future, but the colleges are doing it. And our remit, we feel, is to get people on the beginning of their journey to try to get them into college courses or universities in some cases. So, for example, with English and Maths, we do help people get their English and Maths so that they can apply for nursing qualification, or they can go into health and social care courses with colleges or apprenticeships, for example. So it's very much, I would say health and social care is very much one of our target industries, as well as some of the other growth sectors in Hertfordshire. Have I answered your whole question? Is that okay?
The only part you didn't answer was the divide between men and women. How many men learners have you got? How many women learners have you got?
But our numbers for male learners have dropped slightly from 29% to 25%. So we have roughly 1,200, 1,300 male learners. Again, it's quite, most adult community learning providers in the country tend to hover around 30% male learners, but they also have seen a drop recently. So our trend seems to be quite similar to the trend in other adult community learning providers across the country.
Thank you.
You're muted, Richard. You're muted.
Richard, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm best muted. We'll move on. William.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Chantal. Thanks very much for your presentation. Are you running or planning courses related to the businesses of the future in the climate change area? They will tend to be engineering and physical skill related, but I just wondered if that was an area that you planned to tackle.
Well, that's a good question, because we are just now looking at our strategy for the next 3 years. And we are already now introducing new courses. We have a current focus on digital skills because there is such a need for helping people develop some very basic digital skills. But we have considered the sustainable energies and so on, and we are looking at how we could develop an introduction to those careers, in the view to try to get people into colleges. Again, we're never going to compete with colleges and universities, but our aim is to help people identify pathways to employment, and therefore we want to offer courses that will lead to sustained employment in the future, or actually get them started on those first few steps. So yes, sustainability and sustainable energies are one of the industry sectors that we're looking at.
So you could say that you're pitching at people developing an interest rather than furthering it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, William. That's really helpful. Fiona Guest.
Thank you, Chairman. Will this report also be going to the Education, Libraries and Localism panel? And what involvement does Haffles have with the County Council's education function?
We don't normally report back to another panel. What I have done in the past is present something to the education panel, but it might have been a subset of what we do, with more of a focus, for example, on some of our younger learners. But I wouldn't systematically offer the same report to another panel. We work quite closely with children's services, particularly with for people aged 16 to 25. And for example, for the BBO project, some of the young people that are referred to the BBO project are referred directly by the YCH, or Youth Connections, as it used to be known. So we've got links with YCH. We work with Families First, and we work with the SEN team as well, if necessary. So if you've got somebody who is 16 to 18 or 16 to 20, 25 with an EHCP plan. Is that the question? Has that answered your question?
Yeah.
You're also, just to be clear, Chantal, you are effectively a further education college, aren't you? Yes. And have a board which oversees the work of Haffles. And Fiona Hill sits on the board, and also the director, Steve Voster, sits on that board as well, who then effectively reports up to Chris. I don't think this report could go to all sorts of panels. It comes here. I expect this panel and you as members to provide the appropriate scrutiny and challenge to it, and I wouldn't anticipate officers being asked to go to multiple panels. Going further, I'm not a fan of multiple papers going to multiple panels at a period, but for another day. Thank you, Fiona. That's really helpful. Gina.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chantal. Once again, a very, very interesting report, and I don't think it's to be underestimated the challenges that you and your team will have faced during the limitations in trying to deliver a curriculum to people with learning disabilities in a virtual setting, particularly as you point out that many of them do need support in all sorts of ways, and that has exacerbated the problem. Just a quick flippant question, if you like, at first. On page 36, it says that many group sessions activities are thriving online, e.g. boxing. I was intrigued by that. And perhaps sometime that you'd be able to afford members a taste of virtual boxing online. But on a more serious point, I found the stats on page 35 quite depressing, actually, where it highlights the problems surrounding employment opportunities for people with learning disabilities. And I'll pick on one which says half of employers recently declared they are less likely to employ people with disabilities. How sad is that? And I wondered, is there any incentives that government provide for employers to employ people with learning disabilities?
You're absolutely right. These statistics are frightening. Not only the perspective from the employers themselves, but also the fact that people with disabilities are twice as likely to have been made furloughed. They're twice as likely to have lost their job already. And as we know, many of them were already not employed in the first place. So our biggest worry is people with barriers to employment would be even further left behind, which is why the funding like the BBO project or anything else in the future, hopefully, will help us try to plug that gap. The two things that we're doing, I have agreed to sort of relaunch a pathway to employment forum for people with disabilities, which I'm just about to do. So this is the next on my things to do, and the purpose of that forum would be very much to make sure that we communicate better within Hertfordshire about all of the different types of opportunities for supported employment and employment, like projects or specific employers and so on, that are willing to offer work tasters, volunteering and paid employment, ideally. As part of the BBO project and the work solutions work, we really look at work tasters, volunteering and paid employment as a different stepping stones to hopefully get people into sustained employment. It was already hard before to find employers willing to offer work tasters or volunteer placement to people with disabilities, but it is harder than ever in the current context. And which is why I think it's going to be increasingly important to work with employers. So the next thing on our agenda is to promote and increasingly promote the Disability Confidence Scheme, which used to be promoted really by Job Centre Plus and by the Department of Work and Pension. And unfortunately in Hertfordshire, the number of employers that have embraced the Disability Confidence Scheme is very low. So just to give you a rough idea, in Hertfordshire, as of pre-COVID, there were about 300 employers that had signed up to the scheme or had pledged to the scheme. If you took the city of Bristol or Brighton, they had 1,000 each. So the whole of the county we have only 300 at the moment. So our remit over the next year, 2 years is very much going to be to encourage, support employers to offer work tasters, volunteers and paid placement to people with disabilities and sign up to the Disability Confidence Scheme. So we're going to do a lot of work on that over the next few months. And as a result of that, I've appointed in my team, and that's been part of the slight change of direction and restructure that we've done in my team in the autumn term is we've now appointed within my team a full-time employer liaison officer whose primary remit will be to try to find placements for people with barriers to employment, so find employers that are willing to work with us, and also a volunteer coordinator. Again, that volunteer will be to try to make sure some of the, I think it was you mentioned before about meaningful volunteer placements where people are not exploited. I think this is absolutely vital if we want to make sure that people get something out of it, and volunteering is seen as a stepping stone to employment. There have to be the right volunteer placements, and we feel we can only do that if we've got somebody within our team that oversees our learners and our clients, oversees the volunteer placements, and make sure that we help them move along the pathways and try to get them into placement.
Chantal, that's great. That's put flesh on the bones of why putting supported employment and HAFLs together to make sure there's connectivity there across that continuum of learning and then work. That's excellent. Thank you. Jonathan. And then Nigel, then Ron.
Thanks very much. I was just curious, I can understand, Chantal, that you're keen to get back to face-to-face work, and that's perfectly understandable, and indeed many of the people that you see. But you did say that there's quite a few that actually prefer online. And I wondered why that might be. Is that because for geographical reasons they can stay at home and they don't have to come to your venue? Or is it anything to do with age, you know, younger people preferring it perhaps? Or is it just that some courses lend themselves to being better online than face-to-face?
It's a combination of all of that, but also of profiles. What we find is some people with, for example, anxiety or depression are less likely to engage digitally because they find the experience of getting over the technology as a barrier compounds their sense of anxiety. However, people with Asperger's syndrome, many of them engage much better because they don't have necessarily to keep the video on. They don't feel that they are on the spotlight. They don't have the physical interaction, and some of them prefer to engage online. So there is something about the profile of learners. The second thing is that it also depends on the type of courses. There are some courses that tend to attract people who really want to connect to people. They need that social element, and they find that they socialize better by being face-to-face in a community centre or in a school or wherever it is that we're delivering. Where others want to do a course because they want to upskill themselves, they want to improve their maths, they want to improve their English, or they are quite specific about what they want to learn, and those engage much better online. So it's not only the profile of the learners, but it's also the type of course that we offer. And then what we've started to look at is whether by offering courses at different times of day, what we've noticed that people are more able to engage maybe at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon because they don't have to travel to go somewhere. They can fit that in, or they can fit a course at 2 o'clock until 3 o'clock just before the kids come back from school. So there is a timing element there as well, and as well as geography. What we're analysing at the moment, but I don't have the results yet, is to look at whether we're attracting more people from rural areas online than we would if we were doing it face-to-face, because we know historically it's been quite difficult in engaging some people from more rural areas, and actually offering a digital solution, a digital version of the course might be a way of keeping them engaged. So basically what we're doing now for the future is to look at every single course and working out, okay, what is our typical audience? Is it better to continue online? Is it better to offer a mix, or is it better to do it face-to-face? And that's where we're going to continue transforming our curriculum on the basis of how can we make sure we can continue reaching the right people in the right way, And those,
Chantal, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. What can I suggest for those that are re-elected and or come back to this panel, that we seek, Chantal, through you, an opportunity for panel members to visit with a setting with learners. I did this last year, and it really brings to life some of the vulnerabilities of those that we serve with education and engagement opportunities. Some of these people are really quite, I think, as Chantal said, very nervous, very unconfident, shocked by what life has thrown at them. And it's really good to meet with them and see how they're tackling their learning opportunities that we are providing. So that's an offer. I'm sure Chantal won't mind me dropping that bombshell on her. And I think post-election is a very good time to do that as part of induction.
Chair, is that along with my request for the online boxing session?
Yes.
I think personally, I'd be very happy to have a real boxing session with you, Dreda, and whilst I would wear a head guard, you wouldn't. So there we are, and I'd be very up for that.
Winner takes all. Winner takes all.
I'll make sure it happens.
Winner takes all. I heard from Nigel. That's marvellous, Jonathan. Thank you for your question, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very looking forward to the virtual boxing sessions. I think that sounds a great idea. Chantal, thanks for such a wide-ranging report. I mean, I've got yellow highlight over so much of this that I want to ask questions on, so I won't go into that. I'll wait for the induction in June, assuming I get re-elected. And I noticed that you've got a webinar mentioned in here, also, I think, scheduled for June, which I think will be incredibly useful for members. I wanted to ask a sort of a wider question, really. It's a reflection of my ignorance, and apologies for that. But you cover a really wide range of objectives, I think, looking at your report and also having a quick look at your website. And I would like a sort of a flavour for how much of your work is directed at those who are eligible for assistance and how much is for the general population, because I think, looking at the website, a lot of what you do is eligible to anybody. And how much of that is subsidised and how much isn't. And that would be just a really useful background note for all of us to understand the totality of what you offer.
Okay, so roughly out of the £6 million turnover for my service, £500,000 comes for work solutions. Rest is all external funding. So about £3 million a year, a bit more than that now, from the Department of Education, and then the rest is European social funds or smaller sources of funding. In terms of yes, we are open to everyone, so anybody can be referred to the service. However, if you would see from our website as well, that is we target people with barriers to learning and employment.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at our BBO results, 60, depending on whether you look at the young people strand or if you look at the adult strand, but it's roughly 60% of them have got learning disabilities and difficulties. Roughly 20% of them have got mental health issues, diagnosed mental health issues. If you look at work solutions, they all are referred through the care sector. So they have more complex needs. If you look at the adult education service, we've got similar numbers with 20% normally with people with disabilities and so on. So we track all of these results and we break down. We can look at any data per age group, per postcodes or areas, per type of course that we offer. So we can cut the data in so many different ways because, as Richard said before, we are part of the further education and skills sector. So we fund it through the Department of Education like a college. And therefore our management information system is very much geared up to report back to the Department of Education. And therefore we've got to report as if we were a college in terms of age groups, in terms of disabilities, in terms of ethnic groups, etc., etc. So the data we have is huge. We always have to decide what's the most relevant for for the purpose of the meeting or the report that we're writing.
Thanks for that, Chantal. If I could ask just a couple of specific questions on what's in the report. There's a reference here to the change in referrals of mental health patients no longer coming to you but going to HPFT, and I just wanted to know what that meant in terms of what was offered to them. Are HPFT offering a very similar service to what you do, or is it completely different? And the other, just a comment on the I'm very pleased to see in 415 that you've managed to do blended learning, or tried to, I think, with different guidance coming out of the Department of Education. And just, it's frustrated me throughout this when talking to schools that the Department of Education is not more flexible in terms of the schools' response to COVID. I'm glad to see that you've managed to deliver what the schools have been denied the capability to deliver. Anyway, that was all. But if you could answer the question on mental health.
The adults with mental health issues are now referred to HPFT because HPFT is funded by Adult Care Services to offer an employment support service as well. So in the past, we used to get some coming through Work Solutions as well, but we have decided as HPFT is funded specifically to deliver supported employment for people with mental health issues, that we would focus on people with other disabilities. Okay. So that's where we stand at the moment. That could change because, as you've probably ever guessed, now I'm forever looking for the pot of money. And I'm forever bidding for other sources of funding, and I think that the number of people with mental health issues is on the increase, as we know, and the people that will require help to get into work will go up. So I'm very keen into bidding for additional sources of money so that we can start working again with people with mental health issues as well, alongside of HPFT.
So that cohort of mental health patients that HPFT have got the funding for, what are they receiving that's equivalent to Work Solutions? And Richard, where does that report to?
The service they have is similar. I don't know about their results or anything like that. That doesn't come to me. Maybe Chris can report back on that. What I do know is that their model is different from ours. Our model is very much a nationally recognised model, which is called BASE, which is the British Supported Employment model. That's British Association Supported Employment model. And one of the main differences is that we work very closely with the employers, and we help the employers carve jobs. We help employers adapt their practices to support the person that they are likely to offer a paid work, and we support the employers and the client as well beyond the first stages of employment. So we support them up to 6 months after, sometimes even a year if necessary. Where I think that HPFT tends to stop quicker. I don't know how long they support them once people are in place in work.
Can I just bring in Chris, if you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
and then I've got a comment as well, but Chris, come in first.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously contract HPFT to a number of different things around the social care provision, so that's monitored through we've got a dedicated standing group that monitors performance on that, because ultimately the responsibility still lies with us, even if we're discharging it through in this case, a contractor or a partner in HPFT. When we do the strategy work that we're going to do that Chantal's mentioned and we're talking about, which is built on the management changes we made around bringing this together, but the wider work we want to do on particularly learning disability employment, but probably employment for slightly wider to people with different social care needs too. We won't be exclusive in that it'll only be us. We'll cover our whole set of responsibilities. So we'll bring in partners that are relevant, and that would include HPFT, Nigel.
My comment here is, I suppose the broader point, Nigel, is that we want the learning opportunity and the employment opportunity to cover the broadest, which is come back to your first part of your comment, the broadest possible cohort. Subdividing the cohort, so some go off in one direction, some go off in another, is possibly going to be unhelpful and won't necessarily enable capacity to be built with specialist voluntary providers, for example. So I think that there is the potential probably to do more with not just those with specific mental health issues, but just touching on all of those that fall into a vulnerable category. That's fundamentally what we're talking about with HAFLs. These are relatively vulnerable people, either because they haven't had education in the past, or because they've had issues which have brought them to education very late in life. And some of that is, for example, domestic abuse, mental health. There's a whole range of issues out there. And there is a connectivity between vulnerable adults and that strategy, with HAFLs, with employment, and coming out of COVID, there's going to be lots of probably domestic abuse and mental health. And I think it all kind of has to be evaluated on how best to support. So I think it's a really valid point. And I pick up the point that Chris and Chantal have just affirmed around sort of strategic thinking, sort of post-COVID, the next few months. Great, thank you for that, Ron, and then finally it'll be Fiona Hill.
Thank you, Richard. First of all, you'll be pleased to hear that most of my concerns and queries have been answered previously. I just want to. I know.
Fiona Hill.
I can't resist just asking on page 9 of 15, which is 35 in the pack. It's concerning the bullet points on and the reference to the 27% of disabled workers facing redundancy due to COVID. I just wondered, there's a couple of questions. First of all, Chantal, what advice do we provide, or do we have any opportunity to provide advice to those disabled workers facing redundancy? Or do we actually refer them to an advice centre so they can actually challenge the employer's decision if they've got the necessary employment record? I just feel this is an area which perhaps has been lacking. Employment rights is actually a very good issue at the moment, particularly the success of the Uber people in the Supreme Court. And so employers are having to start to think, well, hang on, they can't get away with everything, even under Boris's regime. And so I just wondered what we're doing to support those in employment who are potentially placed with victimisation.
Mm-hmm. Impressive link there, Ron, from Uber to Boris. Fantastic.
I know.
Leaving that aside, Chantal.
Okay, so first of all, we don't work with everybody who is actually employed and has a disability. However, our remit is about offering upskilling opportunities and making sure that the people that we know of who have already accessed our service can get ongoing support to make sure they do not lose their job. So, for example, if somebody is employed and has been seen as supported by Work Solutions in the past, they can automatically call us back and say, I have an issue with my employer. And we will then work with them directly. So we will pick them up again. And that's actually happened quite a lot over the past year. So although the referrals into the service dropped due to COVID, we did an awful lot of work to make sure that people were keeping their jobs or were made furloughed if they had the right to be made furloughed, and now supported back into work and not being made unemployed just because they have a disability. So we did quite a lot of work on that side from the Work Solutions team. What we also do is work increasingly with Job Centre Plus and their disability employment advisors. Now, of course, if they come through the Job Centre's route, that already means that they are unemployed. We are not in a position to, or we don't get to hear, or we're not in a position to support with legal matters the people who are employed in the private sectors not known to us. because we're not an advisory service to make sure that people don't lose their jobs because of their employees making them redundant on discriminatory grounds. So this is not our remit. However, if people are known to us, they will call us back, and we make sure that they know we're here to help if they are in a difficult situation with their employers.
That's right. Just wondered, you mentioned Job Centre Plus. Have you thought of actually trying to create a liaison with Unison, who may be useful in this sector?
We haven't. That's a good idea. Yes, I'll take that on board, and I'll take that back.
They may be able to plug the gaps that you can't. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. So, Ron advocating that Unison start running some of our employment and education services.
No, actually defending our people if they're victimised by employers.
Thank you, Ron. It's great. Understand. I suppose the key point, Chantal, I'm glad the answer that you gave, because quite obviously, Work Solutions and Haffles put a huge amount of effort in getting an employment place and supporting that place. For example, I remember meeting a young man who had got a job with Computer Centre, and it had taken 6 months to be able to move that person who had autism into that role. And once they were in, it was perfect for them. Absolutely perfect job. Why would you just let that fall away? So whilst the figure from the national figure there at 27%, there was no assumption that those should just fall by the wayside. We supported those people into employment. We should support them to stay there. And I think that's the sentiment that comes through, Chantal. Thank you very much. Fiona, you wanted to finish us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to endorse all the positive comments by members this morning and also make a plea. As you said, I'm very close to this. I sit on the Haffles board and very aware of all the achievements and hard work of Chantal and her whole team, particularly through this year that we've gone through and the challenges that has brought. So I'd just like to urge all members to promote the excellent work of Haffles throughout their divisions, because I don't believe we are as widely known as we could be, and anything anybody can do to help that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Fiona, that's really helpful. Thank you. I just quick double check. I have no more speakers. Thank you. Chantal, just leaves for me to say I almost don't need to do a summary here, because we've covered so much and are summarising as we go along, and there'll be some key points that we'll pick up in the minutes, and panel members to be reassured that we will be picking up on those areas of concern in future work, and you will through your strategic work. It's a warts and all report, which is really appreciated. It doesn't hide anywhere. But it also, I think, strikes at some of the ambition to bring all this together, and therefore to do more with less almost. Although with a budget of 6 million, I think there's an expectation of quite a lot being done. We note that various organisations may be supportive in the future with funding, and I will be delighted if that is confirmed. And so I don't need to cross my fingers, because that's possibly going to happen. That's really good. And just to thank members, as last year, in fact, strong memories of this review report from last year, but as always, stimulating debate and lots of enthusiastic engagement because of the nature of the cohort of our residents that we're talking about. So great. Thank you, Chantal, to you and your team, and to Fiona, who sits on your board. Really, really grateful. That's excellent. And I can see that there, if we could note or agree the report, I'd be really appreciative. And just to let those who are managing us, I think we will take a short break. It's 11:58. We will resume again at 5 past, and then we have just one more item left of the meeting. Thank you so much. See you all at 5 past, and we can find out what the result is of this. Chantal, appreciated. Thank you. We should be going live any moment now.
Richard, I'm presenting this one, not Helen. Now.
We're ahead of you, Chris. We knew that before you did.
Chairman, we're live.
Thank you so much. And we're back again. Ladies and gentlemen, panel members, we only have one more item to consider, which is the COVID update, which we're bringing during this pandemic. We have brought to each panel just to let us know where we are. These have been the most difficult of times, and particularly with the second variant coming literally as we approached and into Christmas, and dealing with that is something that has kept adult social care and health are focused for a long time, and particularly since we last met. Chris, you're going to introduce this report. I'm grateful for you doing so. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I'll take the report as read. I'll just pull out a couple of things
fine.
That have updated since there. So in terms of the position around the outbreak as it relates to care settings, you'll see there a graph in 4.1 that's based on Office for National Statistics data on care home deaths. The latest position on that is that the deaths in care homes are now at a level broadly where they were at the end of November. So that trend has continued. Indeed, it's probably accelerated down. Similarly, when we go to the internal graph on 4.2, you'll see a couple of data anomalies on there, but I've just kept it in so it's as authentic as you would expect. That looks at wider outbreaks within care settings, staff and residents within the care categories outlined on the right. Again, that's gone down to levels probably nearer to September now. So I think as at the last I looked, under 20 residents now had COVID from that group, and that had been up as high as 750 in January. And again, similar pattern with staff. You know, that's related clearly to lockdown, but also the pace of decline on that would indicate to me an impact of vaccination. I can't prove that, but it would be, I think, a fair assumption to make. Just in terms of the vaccination programme, then just obviously these figures get updated every day. Daily. So in terms of care home residents, about 92 in older people's care homes, about 92% of care home residents have been vaccinated. A number where there'll be always a number that refuse, don't want it, or can't have it for particular medical reasons, or where they couldn't be vaccinated the first time because they may have had COVID, for example. So 92% is pretty good, really. We're continuing. There's a process for catching up with people that haven't had it the first time round, and clearly beginning to do second jabs. Individuals with a learning disability, which is an area where Hertfordshire with NHS partners and the council look to really prioritise as an area to really move on that quickly. 82% of individuals with a learning disability in Hertfordshire have had their vaccination, keeping hard working on that. Clearly, you've got to do a bit of work, maybe with people to help them understand the vaccination, make sure they can make an informed choice about it. And also make sure the vaccination is accessible sort of physically as well in terms of getting it out to people. So that's really good. In terms of workforce, we think that's now quite difficult to judge this one because there's a lot of staff to count in different organisations. We think that's running at about 70 to 75% of social care colleagues have been vaccinated. Within the county council, that figure is much nearer to 90% in terms of in-house services and social care, social workers, etc. Keeping going with webinars and support to care providers to get uptake up. Issues that are driving people not having it would relate to fertility, which is a very understandable issue. While people might be a bit reluctant, some people reticent about vaccination full stop, which we're working with to help support them. Again, that figure stacks up well against national data in terms of vaccination levels. So while we want to do more, we don't stand out as an outlier. So that's progressed really quickly, even since the report was published. Clearly work still going on in terms of vaccination. We've also worked with the national system and local partners around unpaid carers to make sure they get vaccinated. So we shared data through Alex Ogle's team on the carers that we know about, work very closely with carers and Hearts around carers that they know about that we may not know formally. sharing that information nationally to make sure those carers in unpaid carers get vaccinated, and that's absolutely part and parcel of this current phase of vaccination. So I just wanted to update on those figures because they're clearly quite live sets of data. I won't go into any more detail because people are aware of the themes, and I'm just happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Chris. Particularly gratified, less surprised about the 92% for care home residents, but really delighted at the accelerating programme going there through LD. We said it before, we've commented on it before. I am so pleased that we as a health and care system prioritise those with LD, because they were really vulnerable with the second variant. I don't know if you want a quick comment on that, but we had more infection and mortality this time round than the first peak, did we not? I don't really just want to comment, Chris.
So what we saw was a wider range of outbreaks in the second peak on a number of different dimensions. Number one, geography. So geographically, the outbreak hit care settings across the patch, whereas in the first wave, epidemiologically, it seemed to come from London, and therefore the lockdown impacted for the northern and eastern parts of the county. It had more of an impact because the virus hadn't got quite as far up the county broadly, if that makes sense. So it's been more geographic dispersal. So our rate of mortality in care homes was less than it was in the first wave for older people, whereas other counties in the region that didn't get as bad an impact the first wave had more this time round. And yes, there was a bigger impact in wider set of care settings, so supported living settings, residential care units for people with a learning disability, which led to a disproportionate impact of people with a learning disability with COVID, which was a national pattern. We saw much more of that the second time round. And actually, some of the providers that we've really had to step in to support have been those smaller providers supporting people with a learning disability, because they're smaller, which is great because that's a much better care setting for people, less institutional. But you've got less built-in resilience around staffing and so forth as a result of their size. So yeah, a different pattern the second time round. We think the acceleration of cases that we saw in December and January, we can only assume was related to the increased virility of the Kent variant.
Yeah, we are. Chris, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to ask William, then Ron, are the only two people indicating at the moment. But William, then Ron. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I had a simple question. No, not so much a question as a request. And I was thinking about the route we're taking out of lockdown, if that's relevant. I'd like to put in a plea for people with dementia that if there is any priority in recovery plans, that they should be considered near the top, as they have been more seriously affected by the lack of family and friend contact. I don't know whether we can introduce that into policy in any way, but it sure would be appreciated.
Chris, do you just want to comment on, perhaps I mentioned it at the top of the meeting, but just the work that we've done with Alzheimer's Society, etc., to prioritise the visiting regime. I presume, William, that you are referring to those with dementia in care homes. You might also be referring to those who have dementia and domiciliary care as well.
Yeah. So yeah, clearly in terms of care home visiting was one example. Yeah, that's been going, we think, pretty well in terms of care homes taking that on, and obviously that's a particularly important issue for individuals with dementia and their carers. I'll move on to the community issues in a second. Homes have rightly been working on it purposefully, but with a steady pace, because they, given what's happened in terms of infection control, they've wanted to make sure they get their systems right and then build up the pace at which they're allowing visitors in. So that's ongoing work, but on the whole, that's been received positively. Yeah, so I agree on dementia, William. So that's why we have agreed an interim dementia strategy, a one-year action plan jointly with colleagues in HPFT to prioritise that. Big impact on people with dementia and their carers if they've got unpaid carers. So that includes support around things like short-term breaks, sitting services, etc. This buys us a little bit of time to do the longer-term work we want to do on dementia anyway, William. So yeah, totally agree with that. We're absolutely in lockstep with you on that.
That's good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. You just reminded me that we rolled over the dementia strategy, and so we can think about it in the next year, perhaps with less, with COVID less on our shoulder than it might have been. But thank you, William, for your question, concern for those with dementia. Really appreciated. Ron.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, as this is probably the last opportunity I will get, can I say a very big thank you to all the officers and staff and everybody else connected with adult care services. It's been a privilege to sit on this panel, and you yourself, Chair, and Fiona. I think it just shows how local government can work properly if we're given the opportunities to do so. So thanks for that. Turning to, it's a topical issue, and so I'm not expecting an answer now, but I would be grateful if we could have a briefing note later. On the news this morning, there was a CQC concern about do not resuscitate notices. I know, typical of the media, this will raise a lot of hairs and worry people. Is it possible we could have a briefing note at some point over the next couple of days to just know what the situation is in case we are contacted by residents with concerns?
Yeah, right.
To say, I don't expect an answer now.
No. Well, I think I've got a part answer I can share with you. So colleagues that may not have read the article, it's a report by Care Quality Commissioner, as Ron has said, highlighting very mixed practice in terms of the implementation of do not attempt to resuscitate orders. Clearly, it's a very personal process that must be done on an individual basis based on what that individual and their family have commented on and want. Very, as you can imagine, very structured process that's delivered to make those safe and effective. Some instances, sadly, where in the midst, particularly the first wave, so-called blanket DNA CPRs were put in place, i.e. people were assumed to have to be on a do not attempt to resuscitate order by nature of either their age, where they lived, or that they had dementia or a learning disability. Clearly, totally and utterly unacceptable. It's important to stress that Tom Hennessy, one of my colleagues, reminded me just now that actually back in April, the local clinical clinician groups put out a message to care providers and GPs, reminding them of the importance of do not attempt to resuscitate orders being personal and being individualised and not being at all blanketed in nature. Now, I can't sit here and say that no such orders were put in place in Hertfordshire. I don't know that. We'd want to go back and look, but certainly it didn't come up locally. There was a couple of times when the communication needed to be improved, and once we went back to look at the communication with individuals, actually they weren't blanket orders. They were clumsiness in communication, but luckily it had been challenged before it got that far. Well, definitely something that we'll definitely want to look at as part of our reflection on what had happened. But as I say, we put out with the CCG early communications back in April about our insistence that no such blanket orders were put in place. But we'll want to go back and revisit it in light of the CQC report. We should always do that when a national report like that comes, to check what's happened locally, to make sure that doesn't happen. You know, and again, we always must, I think the whole, especially with, I think, learning disability too, we must always go back and just refresh everyone's understanding around the rights of people with a learning disability, that we're always advocating for that. They don't always have the sense of strength and advocacy that they may deserve, and I think it's a duty of the local authority sometimes to do that on their behalf across the health and care system, and we continue to do that.
Thanks very much, and as I say, a very big thank you to everybody.
Ron, your thanks, which is so cross-party, is really appreciated. On behalf of, I've said it before, but on behalf of panel and to all ACS officers, but also the wider care partnership which exists both in the private and vol sector. This has been a challenging year, but we've worked better, we've worked closer, we've had better outcomes. We're going to hang on to some of that. It's really positive, and Chris and his team, but with the support of me and you as panel members, have helped in that, and I include scrutiny in that as well. I think the question that Ron has just raised is one that will probably, I would suggest, resurface through, if it's going to resurface, through the Health and Wellbeing Board. I personally, just to reassure you, I personally raised this with the director some months ago, before the second peak, for the most obvious of reasons, and that's why I think Chris is able to give you the answer to that. So I we'll move on to Fiona Guest, and then Drida.
Thank you, Chairman. There are 2 points here. The first one, that's on page 44 of the report, 4.1. See the graph there. A second spike in COVID deaths and care homes. Second spike in Feb 21. Do we know the reasons behind that? And then moving on to page 45 of the report pack, is 4.6. As 8th of March, visiting was only allowed in care homes outside or behind a screen, which had been unfavourably compared to prison visiting. But 8th of March, care home residents are allowed a visit from a single named individual who's had a lateral flow test, but wearing PPE and avoiding close contact. How do we get, in Hertfordshire and nationally, this is a big question here, how do we get that balance between infection control and humanity? People can see and be close to their loved ones without a dehumanising mask. How do we get that balance between infection control and the human touch?
Okay, thanks, Fiona.
Okay, two parts there, Chris. Why do we have a second peak? And also the basically coming back to care home visiting again, and what we've done to facilitate that.
So we, when we look at the data, so the first question that Fiona's raised around 4.1 and the care home deaths rolling 7-day total, when you look at that graph now, the trend continues. We're seeing that the position from the end of December to February as a single wave rather than 2 waves. So that dip off at the end of January that you see before going up, we would see that not as anomalous data, but as sort of noise in the data in terms of a weekly position rather than anything epidemiological behind that. I've checked that against regional colleagues, and there doesn't seem to be any discernible pattern about that. So I'm not seeing that as another wave or a peak or a change in practice at that point, rather just some of the ups and downs that you would see in a still relatively small number of cases there. So you'd like to get some of those spikes. Indeed, other areas that they've got a greater sense of spikiness in the data, and that relates to them perhaps having smaller numbers. So I'm not seeing that as a wave personally. Happy to be challenged on that if others think it's got statistical significance. Point on the visiting absolutely gets to the crux of the matter, Fiona, around that balance between humanity and visiting. Throughout the pandemic, myself and Jim McManus, the Director of Public Health, have worked really closely on our visiting guidance and policy. So government have given a lot of guidance, as you know. Within that, there is a certain amount of latitude for local decision making about when visiting is or isn't appropriate. We broadly sought to take a permissive approach, namely one that looks to facilitate as much visiting as possible within the government guidance and actually in some cases law that was allowed, because we see, especially as lockdown went on, the very significant health and well-being and mental health issues associated to visiting not taking place. So the issue around PPE is one that I would say at the minute I think in agreement with the government's position around wearing PPE for close contact visits. What I would say is there's still the ability to have close contact visits and visits that were available before the 8th of March, namely behind a screen or outdoors. They'll be increasingly more viable as we go into the summer. That allows for visits where different levels of PPE may be required. So I think at the minute the balance is right. What's clear is when infections do get into care homes, it's very hard to manage. That's what we've learned, that once there's an ingress into a care home, it's very difficult to stop that. As we know more about the effectiveness of vaccination. As we know more about the links there between hospitalisation and how the extent to which care home residents are protected, and indeed staff, and vaccination rates go up, that will no doubt be kept under review. As I understand it, it will be kept under review as part of the overall lockdown exit plan that's come up centrally, and we'll need to keep that, because clearly we want to get to a position where those visits are as free as possible from restrictions. So I'm glad we've had the announcement on the 8th. It feels like a reasonable step, but as you say, we'll want to reduce those restrictions on the visiting as soon as we can, and as soon as the science and the epidemiology allows us to do that.
Really, really helpful, Chris. Thank you for your question, Fiona. I've got Drida, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is really perhaps to Chris in terms of the discharge to assess funding. I wonder if you've got any update on the future funding arrangements for that, because government have been picking it up, but I guess that's only going to be a short-term arrangement.
Yeah, so as yet, I think it's a live issue, Drida, I'll be honest. I think there's still negotiations, as I understood from conversations with colleagues yesterday at the Department of Health. I think it's a live discussion still. But as it currently stands, that funding will cease at the end of March, albeit placements made up until the end of March will continue to be on the basis of the funding for up to 6 weeks for those people. So there's two issues here. Number one is those leaving hospital for discharge get the first 6 weeks of any care they get free of charge. Now, if in normal times that would be the case for enabling home care, you get up to that 6 weeks, but not for a self-funder, for example, that's going into a care home. But at the minute, that cost is being picked up by the government. As of that arrangement ending, which we must assume it will do until we hear otherwise, we'll support that. But when that does end, we will have to remove the free 6 weeks funding for people after the discharge, because it also creates an inequity with people that aren't going through hospital. Why should they not get 6 weeks funding? So we'll have to stop that. What we're doing is working locally with the clinical commissioning groups to say, well, look, what level of capacity do we need in discharge to assess in terms of either bed functions or home care to deliver sustainable support for people, but also generate the flow from hospital? What does that level look like? It'll be less than we've got now, because the level we've got now was built to manage when the surge was at its peak. So that will reduce. That will leave us with less spend per month as a system than we had before. We'll then work collaboratively with a clinical commissioning group to see, if we have to, what the respective funding level would be to support that between the NHS and local government. We'll do that openly and transparently with the NHS and take off, I suspect, our fair shares. But it's likely that the 6 week free funding we will need to remove, because we then begin to encroach and overreach what we're supposed to do on the Care Act, and it's not sustainable financially for us to take that policy principle on unless there is funding from either the NHS or central government for us to do so. But we will put in a system that allows for suitable flow from the hospitals, and crucially, where we taper down capacity for discharge to assess, whether it be beds or home care, put in arrangements that it can be stepped up again, and we'll do that modelling based on our assumption around when another wave might come, which we would assume to be in the autumn. And we'll have a planning assumption around what those levels will be like, and we'll make sure that we've got capacity to manage a further wave and the ability to up that capacity quickly if we need to.
Here we are.
Chair, can I just come back on that, please? Thank you, Chris, for that very detailed explanation. Given the fact that the funding stream may stop at the end of this month, and you say that you're in negotiations, is there sort of a plan being formulated should that occasion arise when the funding from central government, if it does cease at the end of the month?
Yeah, there is a plan, and we're just finessing the details with that with health colleagues in terms of the capacity, because we've managed to deliver the budget within our limits last year pretty well. We've got a bit of flexibility through COVID monies, and the whole point of COVID monies is to support stuff. So we'll be able to smooth the transition, Dreda, to make sure it doesn't just stop straight away without a plan. But again, we've got on top of this relatively early. So the worst case, we'd have 2 or 3 weeks where we'd have to fund some transition arrangements. But I'm confident that we're talking to the right people in the system to get a sustainable approach. But let's be clear, we can't afford as a system the level of support that's gone in if further government funding isn't forthcoming, nor would we want to, because we're funding a level that we don't need on an ongoing basis. It's delivered for the peaks in COVID, so we would want to adjust it down anyway.
Thanks. And just to reassure, there is a substantial a funding element within the IP to cover for COVID contingency, because there are a number of funding streams, not just this one. There's a number of funding streams that come to an end in March, maybe, not absolutely certain. And we put some contingency aside for that. And probably, this is slightly off the top of my head, but I suspect other councils will have less resource than Hertfordshire, and so government will be looking very carefully at the funding streams that councils have available to them to deal with this issue. I think it's really interesting. The discharge to assess model is almost a reflection of our ability to work closer with health, but is also a significant challenge to ourselves and health, because it almost crosses the divide about who's doing what. And it's as I said earlier, we will bring that back to panel. We will give it Chris and his team really thinking carefully, but we will bring that back through panel so that you understand where we are with that and with elements such as nursing and specialist care being part of that agenda. So really good. Thank you for your question, Dreda. Really helpful. Fiona, and you might be our last speaker. Drum roll.
So, apologies in advance, because I may be putting Chris on the spot and he may not know the answer to this.
He loves it. He likes being put on the spot. It's okay.
It's similar to the care home question, but I've had quite a lot of residents concerned about when they'll be allowed to visit patients in hospital, and I just wondered if there's a similar criteria being applied, or if Chris has got any information on that at all.
So it's not the same policy as the care home visiting policy. So it's a different set of policy that I'm not familiar with. Again, I think there'll be discussions around the level of COVID in the acute hospital and so forth. So the principles behind it are the same, aren't they, Fiona? In that they are, especially for people in for a long stay or in for something particularly serious, then that's clearly going to be an issue. You know, that's one. If it's okay, I'll endeavour to go back and get an answer from NHS colleagues. I don't want to answer poorly on their behalf. If I do that, then we'll share the answer with panel, because I suspect all the panel will be interested. Is that okay?
That's brilliant. Thank you.
That sounds. Thank you, Fiona. That's a really good question. Thank you, Chris, for taking that. That'll be really helpful. Yeah. And I guess that comes back to the vaccination programme again. Hospital staff as well as care staff being vaccinated, but our hospitals are still dealing with a COVID load, and therefore visitation will be probably minimised at the moment. I think it's fair to say. Panel, I think I'm just checking. I don't think I've got any other speakers. I'm really grateful for your engagement in this. This paper covers the period of, and Chris has given us the detail, really intense period for our own services and for health. And again, that voluntary sector support that came in that was so important there with the Sustain programme. And you'll be aware that we even had another, just at the 2-3 weeks ago, another 30,000 people came on the protected shield list again, and we and our partners responded to that. I am delighted to see that, and I've been looking at the detailed figures, we are down to 1 or 2 deaths per week now from COVID, and it's declining all the time. And I'm just so pleased about that, because the Christmas period was pretty hellacious. And again, my thanks to staff, and particularly the senior team, who just went the extra mile through working very, very long days and weekends for weeks on end. And I think, as Chris has said to me in private, I don't know if he said in public, you know, COVID has been live for adult social care for the totality of this period, all the way through from sort of late January, February of last year. It hasn't gone away. The planning and dealing with it on a day-to-day basis has been with us the whole time, sometimes more intense, sometimes less intense, but it never went away. And so my absolute heartfelt thanks for all that's been done. And I guess a last opportunity, I'll say it on behalf of all panel members, thank you to all care staff in all care settings for looking after our most vulnerable individuals, whether they have a disability or whether they are older, frailer residents. My thanks to you all. And that probably just, we just need to note this report. If you could do that while I'm speaking, that would be fine. The next time we meet, Chris is coming in. One more point.
Yeah, just some good news. It looks like, as we just add a bit of drama to proceedings, it looks like announcements on further infection control funding for the care sector are being announced as we speak, which is worth probably keeping an eye out for. What I've just said now might already be out of date, so do have a look on the website. When we know more, we'll endeavour to send you all around a briefing note about it.
That's fantastic. I'm not entirely surprised. It would be rather unlikely. The government has just supported, central government has supported the COVID, the pandemic funding significantly for a year now, and it would be really quite surprising if it didn't continue to do so as was necessary. Hence the furlough scheme being extended on more than one occasion. So good news, Chris. We'll pick that detail up as it comes through. That just leaves me, thank you for agreeing that the previous report, the COVID update, which I think ultimately goes through to Cabinet in some form or another, whether it's particularly our comments, that's not relevant, but it does go through to Cabinet. I will pass on some of your concerns and comment at that juncture. Can I just say thank you so much for your engagement this morning. We've lost one or two. We've come through till 12:30. That's not bad for 3 items, 2.5 hours. You are a very enthusiastic panel, and leaves me just to wish you well for the elections. If you're not standing, thank you for your contribution over the last 4 years, and I will see you all, if not on the other side, but at some point in the next weeks and months to come. Thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye now.